Hey, fellow traveler. Welcome to the Third Eye Awakening podcast, a show where we talk all about spiritual and psychic awakening, magic, the shift from 3D to 5D, star seeds, ascension, multiple timelines, multiple dimensions, the universe, the multiverse, the akashic records, all the good things. I am your host, Amy Belair, and I'm so glad to have you here with me today. Okay, let's do this. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Third Eye Awakening. Today I am joined by JT, who is here to talk basically about like his spiritual journey, psychedelics, so he went to college in sixth grade. What? You went to college in sixth grade? And so I'm like, wait, I know I read that before we started, but it didn't really sink in. Now I'm like, whoa. And took psychedelics for the first time, researching now for over 25 years. It led him to a spiritual awakening over 10 years ago. And his gift is puzzles. So his work is seeing the bigger picture with all aspects. And I remember this from our email conversations that like you feel like your ability is to sort of connect the dots and put pieces together, right?
Yes, correct. Yes.
Awesome. Well, welcome, JT. Thank you so much for being here. I'm like, I need to hear about this like college and sixth grade thing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Amy. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak to you and your audience. And yeah, when I was young, I think I was 12, about 11 or 12. And they were like, hey, you want to go to college? And I was like, how does that work? And they're like, oh, you can go to elementary school on Friday, so you can still have friends. But Monday through Thursday, you'd be a full-time student at the local college. And I was like, okay, sounds good. Like, I'm just this nerdy little kid. Sounds fun. So I go and, front row taking notes. Like, everyone's looking at me weird. People are always trying to talk to me and have conversations like, what are you doing here? Oh, that's so cool. And I met a group of kids who were very like, not kids, I guess they were like younger adults. And they're like, hey, you ever like party? Like, I'm 12 at the time. So I'm like, no, like I live at home. I'm 12. They're like, oh, well, there's raves and there's these parties. And I was like, okay, let me ask my parents, like, kind of like, hey, can I go to this function? And, they met the people who are going to take me, and they're like, okay, sound like good people, like have fun, like we don't want to limit your experiences. And so I go and I end up taking like psychedelics at 12, and it was very mind opening, given like I was very obedient as a child. So everything I was told, I just took as like gospel. So the whole like, don't do drugs and drugs are bad, like really resonated with me as a child. So when I did this, I experienced something like completely opposite of what I've been told. And so now I'm like how much of what I've been told has been like twisted. And I guess that was like my first spiritual awakening, but it really didn't resonate till later. But that was when I first started to question, like, why are people saying these things about things when in essence they're not true? So, and then it like comes back to like Santa Claus and like, as a child, it's all fabricated, and then it's broken down to you that it was kind of like everyone's in on it. And then I had this experience with psychedelics at 12, and then I'm like, oh my goodness, how much of everything is not what it is? And, so, and then I did college for like a year, and then some personal stuff happened, and I was just like, you know what, it's not really like for me. I'd rather be a normal kid. Like, that's what I came to the conclusion was like, I don't want to be this like outlier of like being a doctor at 16 or anything. I want to be like normal. I want to have a human experience that isn't such an outlier experience. Yeah. So I went back to regular school and, continued. But that's kind of like, it was a very strange time now that I look back on it, being so young and being around young adults. And, this is like in the 90s. So
yeah,
it was interesting nonetheless.
So I'd say like, oh my God, you're 12 and people are like, hey, have you ever partied? You want to try these psychedelic drugs? This is why like proper, real, fully grown, functioning adult, not necessarily like helicopter parent supervision, but like direct involvement is important, because I can tell you the decisions I was making as a young adult in my late teens, early 20s were not adult decisions, and feeding psychedelics to a 12-year-old is not an adult decision.
No, not at all. I don't think my parents knew that was going to happen. But like now that I look back, I guess there could have been like two, like there could have been the like club, like kids who are like, hey, let's go to a club and drink alcohol and do cocaine, and like very strange. That would be strange to ask a child, you know, but this was more like a rave. And at the time, this is when raves just started to like really pop off in America. And so it was a very like, I guess like a rebirth of the hippie generation. So like it was just kind of like, hey, you know, come have fun. You can do what you want, but you don't have to do anything like, you know, you don't have to do anything you don't want to. And I've heard so many stories about this. You know, they fascinate children with, you know, the whole aspect of drugs. So it, you know, there's curiosity as well, kind of like, well, I feel safe and I'm out here with all these people. So, you know, I look back and it was very strange that like that all happened like that, especially now. I wonder like what those adults grew up to be and how they function. But I don't think they meant any like negative or harm at the time. I don't think they were being malicious. It was just kind of like, hey, you're young and you want to see what college is like you want to see the whole spectrum, or you just want to be like driven down this path that all these adults want you to do, of like take these courses and go to this university and major in this. And you know, so it was nice for them. I feel that they like tried to give me a broader spectrum of college life.
Yeah,
it did help propel it.
I'm sure they weren't, like, I can imagine just thinking that it's cool and not really understanding the consequences potentially. Being like, hey, do you want to come party with us and maybe do some drugs? But it is nice that, you know, as a 12-year-old being, so I'm assuming that you were just very, very intellectually gifted, and that your grade 6 class was not, you know, didn't have anything to offer you, and that's why they offered for you to go to college?
Yeah, so, yeah, ever since I think like I was put into like the accelerated programs like since like third grade, and just like even in those I shined, I guess. So they just felt like, I don't know who they is, but at the time this group of people, including my parents and the school and all these other people, felt that it was like something I should do.
Yeah.
So
The adult deciders.
yeah, so, and it was nice. I'm like, because it did open my mind and it did give me a chance to go back to regular school, which I did enjoy. You know, I was telling all my friends like, oh my gosh, like everybody who's telling us that like psychedelics are bad, like I don't think they've done them. And like, so I'm telling all my other younger friends, all my 12-year-old friends, my experience. And but eventually I graduate high school, I go to college, I get my master's in mathematics. So I did continue like the educational system process. I felt like I wanted to check that box because I was given that like intellectual drive of
Mhm.
like systematic education. So I did go that route and get mathematics checked off because that was fun. I liked puzzles and numbers and, you know, things of that nature. So it just I felt like that would help in my journey, as what I was trying to do is see the bigger picture. Because I think a lot of times people, it's so much knowledge out there and so much information that people, you can dive deep down a rabbit hole of any subject matter and really spend your entire life like perfecting a craft or obtaining knowledge. And but it's just one piece of the puzzle, and the puzzle's so vast that like, that when I hear an expert, because normally I feel an expert when they spend 40 years on something, when they give you a synopsis of what they're speaking of, I think they're giving you like all the deep stuff, like, hey, this took me forever to find out, and I'm giving you all the juicy stuff. So it's like I take all that in and I'm like, okay, thank you. I know I didn't do the 40 years of research, but I feel they gave me what the piece of the puzzle looks like this is what it looks like. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know where that goes. And I'm starting to see like what it's like, you know, and then just incorporate everything else like martial arts and yoga and, you know, psychedelics and truth and spirituality, ascension, the akashic records, like all that like fits into the puzzle. And I mean, it's still blurry, but I'm getting a decent picture of what it looks like, given like people like you, yourself, and, you know, others in the community who are, you know, share their insights and share their gift and share what they've discovered, like the juicy parts, like, you know, and so grateful for that. And
Yeah, it's my favorite part about what I do is just like sharing the, like you said, the juicy insights of what I get. And I spent so many years not sharing it because I was afraid of, you know, that look that you get when you talk about, well, the luck I used to get, but I know a lot of people, when you talk about it and to people who don't see the world in that way and don't interface with reality in that way, and they just think you're crazy. So for some reason that look was really wounding and intimidating to me, and it kept me in a little like safety box for a long time. But now I'm like, oh my God, this is what it's all about. Like sharing the insights we get so that everybody can put the puzzle together. And I love the way you just put that. It's very confirming and validating for me about something that, I don't know, I just feel like I just get given information and it filters through my own psyche. But something I was given last year, especially when everything was inflamed around like BLM and all the COVID stuff, and people were really feeling like most people were feeling like, I am on the side of the right and we all need to agree with this perspective, no matter what their perspective was. And I was sort of received this, I don't know, perspective, this clarity that there is no possible way for us all to agree, first of all, which seems pretty obvious to me, but furthermore, that's not how it's supposed to work, and that none of us is the supreme authority of the truth. We all carry a puzzle piece of the truth. And when we bring it together and all lay it together, that's when we can assemble the true big picture of understanding. So we kind of like really, really do a huge service to each other to share the piece that we have. And it doesn't need to be complete. We don't have to like have the whole answer. We just share what we've received already.
Yeah, definitely. I think something my yoga professor guru says really resonates with me is that he said that two opposing truths can be true at the same time. And I'm sure he heard it from somebody also. But I think that's a big thing in today's world, is that when you have a truth that you hold, when someone else's opposite viewpoint could also is a possibility be true too, but we've been divided for so long that it's like you pick a side and then that's right and everything else that doesn't correlate with it is wrong. But it like, for instance, like I'm like scared of the ocean, like the monster soup, and I don't know what's in there, and just the whole thing. But I love to body surf, so it's like two opposing truth. It's like, how do you love to body surf but you're scared of the ocean? I'm like, they both exist and they both are dually true, and they both exist even though they oppose each other. And I think we have a hard time as humans because we're taught from a young age through sports and politics and everything else that there's a rivalry and there's a winner and a loser and a truth and a lie. And so I think, that's really helped me like understand that, you're right. Like there's no one who knows the journey. We're all on this journey and no one knows where we're going. Like no one, I mean, we kind of have a direction, but no one knows for sure, even though we're like really close. So it's not healthy to just deny other people's perspectives and just jump to a side and dig in your heels and be like, no, that's not how it is, because that just leads to close you off. And then, then you get angles and you're not spherical and you can't be bouncy because now you're developing angles and defense mechanisms. And, you, as a human, that's not what you don't want to be sharp. You don't want to poke people, you want to be more round and bouncy and, so you can bounce off somebody and keep going instead of letting one incident of the day drag the rest of your day down, like.
I love that.
If that makes sense.
That makes total sense to me. It's like improving like decreasing your resistance and like decreasing the amount of friction you experience. And when you get angular, it's like you have these sharp parts that can drag on on other things and slow down your consciousness and your own vibration, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
I love what you were saying about that reconciliation of two seemingly diametrically opposed truths too. Like that's a perfect example of like being afraid of the monster soup ocean, which I totally relate to, past life stuff, but also loving to body surf. Like, they can both exist in they can occupy the same consciousness at the same time. Two seemingly opposing truths can both be true, and that each other's perspectives are not a threat to us. Like we don't have to be threatened by each other's perspectives.
I like how you worded that. That was so beautiful. I think, yeah, people get, I don't know if you're familiar. Are you familiar with the story of Hanuman? It's like an
No, I'm not.
Indian fable. So I'll keep it short. I might butcher it, but Hanuman, a lady wanted to have a baby and she couldn't, so she asked for blessings from the gods, and the wind god was like, "I'll hook you up." So that there was birthed this wind god and human. When it was a baby, it saw the sun and it thought it was a big giant ripe mango, so it jumped towards the sun, and the sun god felt threatened, so he struck him down and he died. And so the wind god was upset and was like, "I'm going to take all the air away from the earth." So plants and people start dying. So all the gods have a meeting and they're like, "Okay, we're going to bring back your son. So bring the air back." And the sun god was like, "Well, he's a menace to the earth. So we have to check him somehow. Otherwise, I don't agree." And so they're like, "Okay, he's going to be forgetful. He's going to forget that he's a god." So what happens is, as he's experiencing life, if he's not fine-tuned to that like antenna of being spiritual and a god, like he's just human and he forgets that he's a god. So that we're Hanuman in the sense of self-doubt, that we forget that we're gods and goddesses, like in that sense, not like a religious sense, but we forget that, and that self-doubt and those defense mechanisms resonate within us. And we are Hanuman in the sense that like we forget like how powerful we are, how our thoughts can manifest. And that self-doubt is a dangerous realm to reside in, because you don't want to make decisions based off of self-doubt and fear in those areas. You want to be more, believe in yourself, believe in your process and your journey and your growth and all that. So I think Hanuman is important in the sense of like we forget our true power somehow. Like I don't know if that's how it's designed or if that's the journey, is to like grow and get that antenna lined up. But that's kind of like, so that's like, I went into, one day I was writing my notes on psychedelics and all my research, and one of my close friends in my tribe was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I kept asking him questions like, "Hey, you remember this time? And hey, what did you do beforehand? And what was it like after?" And he was like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm writing notes." And he was like, "You should turn that into like a book. I think people would find it useful, your notes." And it was basically like, you don't need to, but as someone who wants to ascend and become more spiritual, or you have a gift of some nature, it's like you have to do the work to get your antenna right. So some people can meditate and access like the akashic records, and I believe those people are fine-tuned. They're like, they know their antenna, they know their worth, and they align it correctly, and the universe gives them knowledge. Now if you're like always very jagged and defensive and self-doubting, when you meditate, your antenna isn't aligned to access the same things, like for instance that you access, because your antenna is aligned to get that knowledge while others don't. So I think the book, it just gives like basic steps, which is very yoga-y and very martial artsy and very spiritual, of like, hey, do some breathing, watch what you eat, watch what you think, watch what you ingest physically, mentally, emotionally. And then once you're fine-tuned and you meditate, you will meditate at a higher level. Like, even though meditation is good for everybody, like there's levels to everything. So I feel as a human, you can really fine-tune your antenna.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you probably heard, because I think that you messaged me after I was on Tinfoil Hat, which just has been like, thanks, Sam. It's connected me with so many awesome people. But yeah, that was what I inadvertently found. Like, because I had wanted to be psychic for so many years, and I was having experiences, but they weren't in my control. And like when I would try to meditate, I would experience that frustration, and it wouldn't. I kept kind of being like, is something supposed to happen? Like really disappointed. And then after my son died, that's inadvertently what I found, was that I could fine tune my antenna to receive messages from him. And that was really my only motivation at the time. But if you're fine tuning your antenna, you're fine tuning your antenna. So you receive more sensitivity to more information, period. But that, I feel like that's really what you just shared is like the key. And so when I'm, helping people, supporting people and accessing their psychic abilities, it's that's really like the bottom line is showing up for it in terms of like putting it on the front burner, making space for it, giving it your attention, the powerful currency of your attention and your energy. And then just going through that fine tuning process of coming into your power, feeling what your thoughts feel like in your vibration, what your food feels like in your vibration, what your lifestyle choices feel like, what the content that you consume, be it through YouTube or podcast or Netflix or streaming services or whatever kind of, information media you consume, or the music or the books that you read or whatever, like just feel what impact that has on your vibration, because that's really what it is. And it sounds like kind of like boring ground level work, but it's so powerful. It's not boring at all. It's like the most exciting shit ever to be like, oh wow, I'm a being of vibration. And all of these things impact my vibration, and I get to choose how I vibrate.
No, definitely. In the book, I relate us as like rocket ships a lot. So as a rocket ship, you want nothing to be loose. You want like a very tight, compact type of rocket ship. So that way, while you're traveling, you don't be offset. So if you have a destination in mind, that's why like intention setting is important, not just for psychedelics, but for meditation, journaling. Intention has its place. So when you have a tight, compact rocket ship and none of the panels are loose and the electrical wiring isn't hanging out, then you can get to that destination more effectively. And there's a practice called Katona yoga, which there's so many yogas in the world right now, but this particular Katona yoga based out of New York relates like Chinese philosophy and numerology and so many things, lunar and solar, the Trinity. And they imagine your house having 9 rooms. So 3 floors, 3 rooms each. And there's like a very systematic way you go through the houses. So the idea is you clean your house, you tidy it, you dust it, you organize it. So basically, you're doing that to the rocket ship. And once you do that, and once the inside of your house is tidy and clean and organized, your vibration is so solid that the outside world, when the 3 bad wolves come to blow your house down, they're not able to, because you've done the work. Like you said, it to some people it may be like, oh, dusting, oh, I got to rearrange, or I got to go, like it may sound boring in the foundation, but once you break through that like facade and realize like, oh man, this is my house, like I live in it, like this is my temple, and with it I can go anywhere. So maybe I should, mop the floor and open the windows, open the lungs, and do some pranayama and get fresh air and air out the house. You don't want a stale house and of that. Have you heard of Katona yoga or
No.
these 9 rooms?
No, I haven't. That sounds brilliant to me.
So they say too, like I'm not a Katona teacher, so I'll probably mess this up, but they say the imagination runs wild, right? Like that's why people have difficulty meditating, is because we've given this idea of like, oh, meditation is like not thinking. But if we take it back to the 8 limbs of yoga, meditation is pretty high. I know it's not linear, the 8 limbs, but if they were linear in a sense, meditation's number 7 of 8 right before samadhi. So it's very high level. And before meditation is concentration, where you learn to just concentrate on your breath, or you concentrate on one idea in your head. So in Katona yoga, they use that running imagination for the meditation. So they use that as a means to go through the body and breathe in each area and to clean each room. And each room is, like your left eye is the bedroom. So imagine you're sitting on your bed looking out on the day, and your heart is the spiritual center connected to all the other rooms. And I don't know, it helps in meditation, I think, because since the imagination wants to go places, and a lot of times you hear people say, oh, if you have a thought, let it go. If you have a thought, let it go. And your meditation becomes a whole thing of just letting go of thoughts, which is a good practice in itself. but then we're not like utilizing our imagination, which is very creative. And it's sometimes I do both. I do the quiet meditation and then I do the imaginative meditation. So I think meditation too, people put it into a box, like we were saying earlier. They get like, well, meditation is this. And it's like, well, maybe meditation is different to other people. And
Do you think that we're trained that way to put things in boxes?
yeah, definitely. Like from childhood, I think in almost all cultures across the earth, I think, yeah, I think it's a human instinct of noticing patterns. Like we're very pattern oriented people. And so once you get a pattern, you put it in a box. And I think that helps a lot of people and society grow in general. But at the same time, it is limiting to put things in boxes. So I think, yeah, we're definitely, I think systematically it's set up that way because it's if we didn't put things in boxes, I think it'd be, I don't know, that's a thin line. Yeah, I feel like we do, and it's helpful for people, but the thin line of like getting out the box. That's why they always say, oh, get out the box. And that's scary. That's like, again, self-doubt, like what's outside the box. Like I spent so many years recognizing patterns and developing this, I believe in this and I'm on this side. And to jump out of that is very scary. But yeah, I think they teach us that to keep us in boxes. Just I do. What about you?
Yeah, I do. I do too. And sometimes I wonder if I'm like too, I don't know, cynical about
Mm,
systems, but then I don't know. I don't think I am. I think that they do sort of corral us into boxes, especially through the school process, the education process, because it well, I was saying this to my mom a couple days ago because she's a retired teacher. Both my parents were teachers. So I have a lot of empathy for the reality of being a teacher, for example, or because I was a midwife, I have a lot of empathy for the reality of being a doctor or a nurse, and that it's not the ground
yeah.
level crew that has nefarious intentions. And that, so in school, I think you're really directed to defer to the authority of the teacher and the rhythms of the classroom, the rhythms of the institution, and then also to come to the conclusions that they want you to. Like, so when you're learning about a unit, for example, in school, like I think about how we were always taught this one unit when I was a kid anyway, in grade 4, about First Nations people. And it was one unit in grade 4, and nary a word was ever said about the genocide or the residential schools or anything like that. It was more like, oh, like, the Indians of old, in the language that they would use, the dated language. And so you weren't encouraged to imagine it from a broader perspective or feel into it on an empathic level or an intuitive level. You were encouraged to like learn what was being presented as a way of sort of, I don't know, directing our thinking. And for the teachers, it's because if they have 30 kids to manage in a classroom, it's just a heck of a lot easier if everybody follows orders. But from the bigger perspective, I think that we're kind of encouraged towards this sort of boxy thinking because well, it's really for the same reason. On the grander scheme, there's a whole bunch of, like, from the overlords' perspectives, they it's a lot easier to corral us and keep control of us if we have been acclimatized to following the rules of the institution rather than our own inner authority.
No, yeah, I taught high school for like about 10 years, and I kind of got away from it because of that. It was very like what I was learning through my spiritual process. It was like very different in the school system. Like you're saying, the system itself, a lot of systems across like healthcare, prison system, educational system, those systems are broken, but the people in them are good, genuine people, and they want to help. But if the system is already created and broken, it's I mean, it's quite the task to change an entire system based off the people, because the system isn't organic. It's not a a person. It's just this set of rules. And a lot of times the kids, like, they ask me a lot. The question that resonated with me the most is when kids ask me, like, because I was able to teach like a kind of a spiritual elective at one point. I named it differently, obviously, because the school system wouldn't allow it. But the kids would always ask me, like, is this what you envisioned your journey to be, is teaching us? And I'm like, well, yeah, sharing info. But they're like, but isn't, like, you seem so like you could be doing anything, right? You tell us as kids we can do anything, but then you're standing here doing this. And I'm just like, well, I do have a bigger goal and a dream of like owning a farm and living off the land, and not being so tied to the system. And so many kids were like, well, go do it. Why are you here? Go do it. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm getting pressure from high school kids to go live out my dream. And I'm like, okay, like, I'll go do it. I'll take the risk. And so I'm familiar with that, like the boxing of the mind, and hearing coworkers who are just like very like, they need to follow the rules. And then I don't want to be judgy, but sometimes I look and I'm like, you tell me your personal life, and I'm like, it's a mess. Like, and they would agree to it, like, it's a mess, and yet you're guiding the future, and then you're not living what you're saying. I'm very big on like, don't be a hypocrite, like walk the walk. So it was time to like step away and like dive deeper into disconnecting from the system. And being spiritual, we think that like we're very sovereign. We're sovereign beings. Like, I'm not sure about Canada, but in the United States, it's a process to become sovereign. So you're not just, when you're born here in the United States, you're not just like a free being. Like, you get a birth certificate, you're part of this gigantic corporation. They incorporated in, I think, 1925. So I've taken the process judicially to not be tied to the corporation. So to become sovereign in the United States is an actual judicial process that you need to fill out paperwork, go see a judge and say, hey, look, I don't need you to oversee my decisions because I'm a free being and I'll take responsibility for my own actions. And I feel eventually most spiritual people will take that same route, because if not, you're tied to that system that, like we said, might be advantageous for the overlords and not ourselves. So it's a weird process. Everyone I speak to about it's very iffy. Like, that doesn't sound right. Like, that sounds sketchy. Like, to go to court and say, hey, I don't want to be part of your system. I mean, I did it just to do. I want to walk the walk. I think it's important to walk the walk and not just say all these grandiose ideas, and then it's like, oh wait, you don't do any of the groundwork, you don't do any of that foundational work, you don't clean your house, you don't have that bouncy spherical essence.
Mm-hmm. And which is super interesting. And I'm really curious, like, since you've done that, it sounds almost like an emancipation from like the parent of the state to regain your sovereignty. And how does it affect you in your like 3D life? Like, what does it mean in terms of having gone through the process of reclaiming your sovereignty?
I think it helps. I mean, in the 3D life, we see, I'm not sure how it is there, but then the mainstream media here is very divide, right? Like, very political and all this. So when I hear people which is okay, like if they want to get excited about things, that's fine. But since now that I'm not tied to it, I don't get the same excitement and passion. And so when people are like, hey, what about this idea? Where do you stand on it? I'm like, oh, well, in my tribe, the tribe I am now tied to, that's not that's not a concern of ours. That doesn't exist in our situation. The statutes, the codes, the laws, the division, the weird lobbyists, the corrupt politicians, that stuff doesn't exist. I mean, it could, but right now it doesn't. So I think it gives me a sense of relief of like that I don't have to like pick a side anymore. Before, I really felt like you have to pick a side, and if you're neutral, then they blame you for like not taking a stand and you're not voicing your opinion, and your opinion matters and this and that. And I feel very like relief that I'm not in that matrix anymore, that I'm kind of like sovereign, that I'm on my own. And as a human, like, don't hurt anyone, don't steal, and then pretty much the rest is like kind of okay to do, as long as you're not doing those things where you're hurting or stealing or damaging anything. So it's given me a sense of relief. I think I sleep better at night. And I don't know if that's my ego either, being like, oh, way to go, you did it, you took the step that no one else does, and you're one step closer to whatever it is. I hope it's not ego driven. It could be, but I always tell people, I don't know, I'm very visual, so I always tell people, like, imagine a car or the rocket ship, and it has 5 seats, like your regular sedan, like 2 front seats, 3 back seats. And currently, I mean, the characters inside might vary, but I feel like there's one character is your current self, another character is your higher self, another one is your inner child, you have your ego, and then you have your shadow self. And all 5 of those people are in the car. And the idea isn't to kick anybody out the car. It's like, don't get rid of your ego. Your ego will keep you safe in a lot of situations in this matrix world. So just put the ego like back seat, and don't let the inner child drive, because that's your inner child. Like that they shouldn't be operating the vehicle. Let them sit somewhere, like there's a place and time for each person to be in the car given the situation. And so I'm hoping my ego wasn't driving that decision to become like sovereign. I'm hoping it was my higher self kind of guiding it and my current self driving. But sometimes I worry that a lot of the stuff I do is ego driven, and that the ego is driving the car. I don't know. Do you feel like those 5 characters kind of make sense, or do you have another 5 characters you would put in the vehicle, the
Oh no,
car?
I feel like that's so accurate. So it's the ego, the inner child, the higher self, and then what were the other 2 again?
The current self and the shadow self,
Oh,
the
the
dark
shadow
self.
self, right.
Yeah.
The dark passenger.
Yes, the
Yeah,
dark passenger.
absolutely. I feel like that's a really amazing way of looking at all the aspects of ourselves. And I agree completely. Like they're all valid. They, none of them is to be eradicated or anything like that. But you wouldn't, you would prefer to not have the ego driving, or the inner child, or the dark passenger.
Right,
But
right,
we
right.
all do sometimes, right? Like that's also just part of the human journey as well. Like it would be so nice to come in and just float through life with only our higher self driving and everyone else behaving themselves nicely in the car. But it's just like that would make for a very, I think, I don't want to say a boring journey, but in insofar as like that's what we do, that's what I've seen. That's how we exist when we are not incarnated. Therefore, we have the perspective of our whole soul consciousness, our whole soul identity. We are operating from our higher self. And I say this with a lot of respect for how hard the human journey is, but the fun from our soul perspective of coming and being incarnated on earth is the challenge of having all those fragmented aspects of ourselves, and that sometimes they will take over and drive. And then it's like we want to be challenged. We really do. We don't want to be stagnant. And you know it's kind of like when you were a kid and the grown-ups looking out for you were like, oh, he's even in the accelerated program, like this is all really too easy for him and it's not challenging, and we want to give him challenge because we kind of know like that's important for a developing being, a developing identity. Like if kids aren't challenged, then they kind of stagnate and then like maybe get into trouble or whatever. So we want that challenge, I think, from the soul perspective. It's just that when we get when we get here to earth, they're like, oh.
Yeah. I
So
totally I totally agree. I think I say it this to it's not a knock on the monks in the Himalayan mountains. Like I fully respect them and what they do, and I believe we need that type of energy resonating. Parts of I believe the earth is like alive in a sense, and they have chakra points, and like somewhere like that is where they chose to be, and they really resonated. But at the same time, I feel like, man, the struggle is I guess they struggle too in their own sense. I'm sure they're out there, it's cold, they're not talking, they're like eating very disciplined, and they have very like strict routines. So I'm sure they're having like difficulties, but they're quite different than what I would say in like where you and I reside, is where it's very like that journey is like we're just making it more rough than it is. And sometimes I feel like, man, if you're in the, like, people are always like, oh, I just want to go live in the mountains and be a monk. And I'm like, man, aren't you taking away slightly from the journey then? Because now you don't have media, you don't have social media, you don't have like friends, you don't know what's going on. I mean, and I guess it's true that the news, like news is north, east, west, south. So it should just be what's local to you. Like it should, that's like where the term came from, is like what's happening around you. But given television now and technology, we can know what's going around in all parts of the world, which is awesome. And at the same time, like too much for the psyche. Like there's too much going on to like process it accurately. That's why, you know, when there's genocides and wars and takeovers and all this weird stuff happening, it's hard to really get a firm grip on what's going on because everything's happening everywhere and you have that information. And I guess in a sense, when they're there, they don't have that, which I guess is nice too. But I always do think you're right. Like the journey is about trial and error. It's about, you know, learning lessons. It's about living. It's about up and down. It's and coming around. It's not just all about like ascension. Like they say, if there's no rain, the flowers don't grow. So you need to know what the depths are. You need to know where your ancestral waters lie if you want to like grow anything. And so the journey is important. The hardships are important.
Absolutely. And also, like, I find in doing akashic readings that, I mean, the soul gets so much out of this incarnation experience that it's not a punishment. Like we kind of feel like it is, or we feel like it's a prison. And we, especially right now, because there's so much emphasis on ascension, and I'm like, I love the topic of ascension, obviously, and consciousness expansion. But I also, the more I ascend, it's so interesting, the less I want to leave my human incarnation. The more free I realize that I actually am here, and the more I love being a human, and I feel the finiteness of this experience, and I'm like, oh, I just want it all, like every little tiny little piece of it. And because we come and we get so much out of it. We get like the opportunities to, first of all, be on this gorgeous planet that is, you know, unspeakably beautiful. We get the opportunities to know ourselves and transform. Like it's a journey of transformation, which I think is part of the reason for the forgetting process, is the transformation of like really believing that you are this identity, you know, really believing it, and then having the layers peel back, or having the opportunity to peel those layers back, because not everybody does, right? But having the opportunity to peel those layers back and discover the you that was really underneath it all along. And through that process, like we can only do that through living, or at least I can't say that we can only do that through living a human life, but it's one of the benefits of living a human life. It's one of the total boons that we come for, is to go through that deep immersive transformational journey where we kind of forget who we are, and then the joy of remembering who we are is just so much more meaningful. And every time though, the who we are that we discover is a little bit different because we've transformed through that journey. So it's just like never endingly amazing, which is why I say like there's only ever more of you. There's never less. You will never hit the bottom of the ocean of mystery that you are. It's just not possible.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, back to Hanuman. We don't, you know, you forget who you are, and then every time you grow, you're like, oh, this is who I am, and this is the path. And every little thing, the everything, not even just the happiness and the success, it's everything is an experience. And you know, once it's gone, I mean, I think we'll look back and say, man, I really, you know, wanted to really indulge in all those experiences, even though we label them good or bad or painful or memorable or whatever they were. It's like that's the journey. And you know, that journey, an ascension, the journey to ascension, if it's a hot topic, currently spirituality. I think a lot of people being in the lockdown, get a chance to look inward. And a lot of times we're so distracted with our vices that you don't get that opportunity often. And now that we are, you can kind of, I think, there's obviously a lot of different groups, but I feel like there's two major groups that appeared. They're the ones who took the time to look inwards and be like, ooh, I like who I am, and I want to start peeling, and I want to start discovering more of who I am and where I come from and where I'm going. And then there's the other group who's just like dived into their addictions. Like right now with how the world is, I know a lot of people are struggling with like their vices just overtaking their essence, their livelihood, because it's like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, I'm going to indulge in this because this part of my brain fires and I enjoy it and it's temporary. I'm sure there's people doing both, but I feel that's what came about. So with the spirituality and the ascension kind of being like, it's always been a hot topic through the culture, but given the statistics now, we can track everything and see like it's important, I think, for people to on their journey to like indulge in all the aspects. So meditation, fasting, being aware of what you eat, like you were saying about like what you indulge in, as in music, TV, movies. So if especially I feel this is just personally, like if you're going to do a deep dive and you're going to do it through a hard meditation or a hard fast or a hard, like a big psychedelic trip, or there's many ways to get to that, to see that brief glimpse of the higher level. You have to do those things. You have to like wake up and be grateful, and you got to stretch your body. You're given a physical body, so not to go running or go hiking or do yoga or go lift weights or go surf or climb, whatever it is, like to move the body just in some way is like praising that you do have this temple, this house, and you use it. And from there you can start to climb up, 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 up. And it's not about like getting to the peak, because once you get to the peak, it's like, oh, what do I do now? Now you look around, you see you got to the top, you see other peaks. And then some people just jump to the next peak, but you should look and say, hey, does that peak resonate with me? Do I want to go and see what's at that peak? And then once you decide if it is in your journey, then you go and you start climbing the other mountain, So I'm very into ascension. I'm very into like your thoughts on like for the Akashic records for yourself. Do you think this is like something that we should all be maybe a little part of us striving to see and get a glimpse of, or do you think it's not that?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I'm absolutely positive that this is our birthright and we all get to access it, and that there's not anyone who, not even like spiritually speaking, like spiritual beings, ascended masters, or anybody who ordains us like worthy or not. But I do feel like some of us have it like encoded in our kind of our soul mission or our intention, our pre-incarnation intentions to
Ooh.
access this field. That's what I notice when I run the program to show people how I learned how to access it. I can just tell that everybody that comes in is like, it's for them. It's really for them. So I feel like everybody can access it. The trick is that fine tuning part of your vibration. But I also think that maybe it's not like, it's okay if you don't feel drawn to it too. You know what I mean? And I think too that a lot of people access it and that's not what they would call it, or they don't recognize it by that term. I know I used to, like when I first went into the Akashic Records, I was like, oh, I've been here before. I just didn't realize that's what I was doing, and I didn't know how to control it. So it was sort of like it would just happen when it happened, and then I would feel crazy and wouldn't know how to explain it to anybody. But I think that other people access it, like probably, I know that you said in our emails, I'm pretty sure that you don't access it, but I feel like you probably do. You just access it, you access different information from it than I do. Because, for example, when I'm accessing it, what I really tune into are the stories that we carry as souls and human incarnations and the emotional charge around those stories. That's what really seems to resonate with me. I can see other things too. I can see like different civilizations, and if people ask me questions, like one person, her whole entire reading, it had nothing to do with her personally. She just wanted to know about Atlantis because she wanted to write a book about Atlantis. So she considered this like a research investment.
Nice,
I asked some
nice.
questions and I got answers that I never would have without her, the power of her questions. So that was really cool. But I bet that you also access the Akashic records, and you access more of a pattern, geometric, numerical sort of, like more of that aspect of the information, but it's all the same information. It's just the different ways that we connect with it. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah, completely. That's so awesome that like that's how you broke it down. Because yeah, when I like to access the higher dimensions, psychedelics and meditation. And I feel psychedelics just is a gift from Mother Gaia that kind of like, hey, it's here. You don't have to use it, but if you kind of want like help, like it's like training wheels, it's not like everyone just jumps on a bike and rides it. Like there's a process to it, that this is kind of your training wheels. And one day you don't need it, and ascended masters don't need it. They can just ride a bike. But for the rest of us who've been put in boxes, who like struggle to ride a bike, the training wheels are there. So when I do meditation or large doses and I get there, it has been numbers and patterns. And I do feel like when I get there, again, I don't know if this is my ego, but I feel like it's not, it is for everyone. I think I agree with you on that. It's for everyone, but I think it's not accessible to everyone if their antenna is not fine-tuned. So
Absolutely.
once you get there, it's kind of like a guardian or an overseer or somebody who is kind of just to see your vibration. And if your vibration is good, like quotation marks, then they're like, here, have at it and see what you'll see. Either like you, a cloud, or me, the patterns and numbers. But if your vibration is off, then when you're meditating or you do these large doses of psychedelics, it's like you just feel love and oneness and unity that a lot of people speak of when they hit these runner highs and other things. And I think that's like the steps they're trying to show you to vibrate higher. So when you do get there again, you can see it for what you see it, because otherwise it is for everyone. But if you're stuck in a box, you're not going to recognize what you're seeing. And so that whoever it is going to help you get out the box by showing you love and oneness, and that there's to vibrate higher in a sense. And so, man, I'm glad you put it like that. That makes a lot of sense, that we all see it differently, and that chances are people have seen it. And we don't know what happens when we dream, and who knows what's really happening when and who sees what. So I agree. I like that. I like the way
Yeah.
you put that.
And to me, it feels more like a frequency than like a frequency of consciousness rather than a location. And
Yes, yes.
so it's something that kind of occurred to me this past week, that I was doing a little live in my Facebook group about it, was like, I realized that I think a bunch of my own psychic development has been just consciousness expansion, because the information is already there. Like I thought I got this profound download given to me in May, but I think now, like May last year, but I think now that it was probably already always there, but I just I couldn't read it, or I couldn't receive it or decode it, because I didn't have like my own aperture for my consciousness had not expanded wide enough to receive it and have it translate to me in any meaningful way, if that makes sense. And so I think that the Akashic field is like just this place where you're able to release a lot of your ego limitations through that process of antenna tuning that you were talking about. And then, I don't know, therefore it's like easier to access that higher perspective, because you're not so deeply entrenched in your identity, which is why without the fine tuning, I completely agree with you 100% that it's not for those people, it's for all of us. But if you don't do the fine tuning, you might just get little glimpses of it, like I was. And even then I was trying to fine tune. I just didn't know that's what I was doing. So it wasn't a very refined process. But you just can't access it. But it's not because there's something wrong with you or you're bad or anything like that. It's just like there's too much, like you said, like the body of your rocket ship it's not aerodynamic.
Right.
Yeah, it's too jagged or something like that. Like you can't get up to that higher stratosphere because there's too much drag on it.
And that's interesting. You said that it's been in there and then it's not like you downloaded it. It was there and then you had access to it, because when science starts mixing with spirituality, in terms, it's like it's symbiotic, but then people start mismatching stuff. And the DNA that's in us is very unique and intelligent. And, so it has so much information. As a being, you have so much information. And I think, yeah, through that birth where we forget that Hanuman, and then going through the systematic process of getting put into a box, we forget almost that we're supposed to unlock this data that's in us, and we're supposed to get these downloads and these access to this information because it's in us all, and we just kind of forgot over the process. And maybe that's why they want to put us in a box, so people don't, because once people realize how powerful they are, which I think you probably do a lot in like your readings, and you help people be like, oh wow, I am that person. I can go start that business. I can go start that family. I can go do that vacation. I can do A, B, or C, when before all that self-doubt was like, I'm not going to pull the trigger, like, ever. Like, there's just too many ifs, and that's not what this is about. And you give that, like, no, you're powerful. Unlock your DNA. Let that energy and that knowledge like resonate with you, and let it keep coming, and in the beginning it's always sloppy per se, like it's not like a refined method of tuning, but then eventually it's like, oh, I got this down. I rise and I go stand in the ground. I get grounding in. I stare at the sun before it gets too high, so it doesn't hurt my eyes. And then I'm eating this and that, and I'm being mindful of the music I listen to and mindful of the conversations I have with people. And the next thing you know, at the end of the night, you reflect and you go, wow, I did today was a really good, like, fine tuning day. And I accomplished some 3D stuff, like it's the whole, it comes around, it goes up, down, and always comes around. It always has to come around, because if it just goes up and down, it's linear. But once it comes around, it's spherical, and then it becomes 3D. It's the Trinity. Then you're involved, good, bad, and then is duality. It's very black, white, and female, male, but duality is very mortal. So when you go to the higher essence of, spirituality, you realize the three. Like, I'm big in numbers, so I always notice the trinities. So yin and yang, good and bad. But then once you put yourself in the middle and you mediate between what you think good and bad is, it becomes a trinity, a tripod. It's more structurally, the archetype is more stable. And so black and white and gray, and everything, you add that third element, that trinity, that higher part to it, and things start to make more sense in the spiritual world when you add that trinity of something.
I completely agree. That's exactly how the third dimension appears to me too, is like that middle point, that third perspective that allows us to interact with polarity and choose, just have a relationship with it. Basically, like, a lot of emphasis right now too is being put on, like, which do you choose? Do you choose the side of service to self or service to others? But it's not even just that. It's just having an ability to have a relationship with two opposite ends of a spectrum. And that, wait, I kind of lost what I was going to say, damn it.
That's good when that happens. I feel that's good when that happens. I feel that's good, because the DNA unlocked something. You don't know what it was, but it had to, it unlocked, and that's what I think happens when that happened. Like, knowledge came to you in a different realm, like a different part of your mind. But
oh, that's perfect. That's exciting. That makes me feel better about it. Like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna remember later, and it's gonna make so much sense. I'll share it in Soul Space or something like that. But yeah, I feel like, oh yeah, okay, no, I remember now. It was just gonna say, like, that we also don't need to condemn anybody who still, like, as we talk about ascension and moving up into higher dimensions of consciousness, anybody who still wants to play in that perspective of polarity is welcome to do so, because there's really nothing wrong with it. It's just an experience. But that the real difference is that, and the thing that creates the real stability is that when we forget that we are creating a trine, like our perspective creates the stabilizing trine, then we kind of like merge with that line, that, the scale. But I'm not explaining this well, but like, say if you were really going to break it down to like black or white and all the grays in between, when we merge into the gray scale and, feel like we have to pick a spot on the gray scale to be, that's when we experience ourselves in a really lower 3D way and get really wrapped up in the polarity, which again, there's nothing wrong with that. But as we're expanding our consciousness, we're moving farther and farther away and expanding that trying to create a triangle, which brings so much stability, where we can just remember like, oh, I'm just relating to all of these things. I'm close to the dimension of polarity. And so I get to play with these concepts and, determine how I feel about it. And it's just fun. It's more of a playground and less of a hellhole.
Yeah, you got the mindset and the perspective is very important. There's so many memes on perspective of, so yeah, it can be either or, right? This can be heaven to some people who have really understood and belief in themselves that they can manifest all their thoughts. To them, this heaven. They have a beautiful family, they got a great job, they feel success, they feel love, they feel connected in the community, whatever the thing is that they wanted, they're having. And then at the same time, the others have, just, victim blaming and just very defensive, and the world is always against them. And to them, it's almost like a living hell. Like, it's not the playground. It's something much worse and quite opposite of that. And there's both. And yeah, as soon as you, I guess, pick like to like not even be part of any of that and just look at it from a whole different perspective, it's very eye-opening to see, like, there was a before us, our past. I think we've had past lives and those traumas carry over, and we have ancestral karma, and we have even parent karma all the way back. And then the future, like the future is written and isn't written. It's both. It's again the opposite of or dueling opposing truths. Like it's both. It's not written. You're in control of your own destiny, but then akashic records, like everything kind of is already all knowing. It already kind of knows, given how your vibration is, like where it kind of it's going to lead to. And yeah, I think perspective is important to I think that's why a lot of spiritual people are big on gratefulness journals, or just being grateful when they rise, because it's like, hey, that changes your perspective when you rise and you're like, man, I got to go to work and there's a commute and I forgot to make lunch and blah blah blah, and you wake up and you're like, man, I got a car and there's food, I have options about food. And it's just a different perspective. And I think it's important for people to realize that you can alter your perspective, you can change from one to another, and don't get too stagnant. Stagnant water leads to bacteria, and you want it kind of flowy, not too flowy to where you like crush mountains, but you don't want it stagnant. There should be a good balance, and perspective is important, definitely.
I like the way that you describe like the spherical sort of like, like having your consciousness be spherical, because it makes me think the first time you mentioned it was like, I was like, oh, and it's like a sphere of water or a sphere of light, and like it can like change shape as it needs to move around flexibly in between things, but then it returns back to that spherical drop shape, and it just doesn't drag on things. Yeah.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I want to use that. Spherical of light and water, maneuvering in between and then reforming back into what itself is. I like that. That's a good analogy. And that's what I was trying to say. Yeah, that's so good. I like that.
JT, this has been such an excellent conversation. I really hope that you will come back again because I feel like there is so much, like, we're just scratching the surface.
For sure, for sure.
So much more to talk about. And I mean, even like, I want to even hear more about your book and all that stuff. So yeah, is there anywhere, I know you gave me something in the show notes, anywhere that you would want listeners to find you if they wanted to reach out and they're interested in any way?
Yeah, I only have Instagram, and I'm not even really on that much, but I think I use Instagram like kind of like texting, just like for DMing and stuff. So on
Okay.
there, it's just Jason Toshi 3. So JT is Jason Toshi, JASONTOSHI, and then 3 because of the Trinity. And threes are just, it's a beautiful number. It's not the holy number like 9 or 0, but 3 is a nice one. And so Jason Toshi 3, and then that's about it. Yeah. If
Awesome.
anyone's ever interested, I'm always down to talk about psychedelics, spirituality, truth, ascension, kind of like yourself. Like I'm down for whatever. Like as long as it's positive and enlightening and not just some like let's like be negative and pout in our victimness. Like then I'm down with it. Like I'm down with all that. So
Yeah, just down for good, expansive conversations, hey?
for sure.
Yeah, and just so I don't even know if it was clear or not, but I think I remember you saying that your book was about like basically like how to prepare to use psychedelics, right? So
Yeah, did you ever get it? It took me a while to get to the post office, but I sent it out like maybe a week or two ago. But you're kind of far,
yeah,
so maybe it hasn't got to you yet.
it had to cross the
Okay,
border, so I'm sure it's
that's it's on its way. But yeah, it's just a basic, like very very basic, like we said early, quotation marks, boring. So for anyone who's been on the spiritual journey, they may find the read a little like rudimentary. But for anyone new to it or new to psychedelics, yeah, it's just kind of like, hey, when 2 weeks out, just start to like ease off of the movies, ease off of your phone, ease off of these types of certain foods, and get used to fasting and get used to sleeping. And Rudolph Steiner, I'm like big into Edgar Casey, Rudolph Steiner. Like that's why it's so interesting to me that like I don't want to like sound weird, but like you're like a female version of like someone who accesses the akashic records. And for history, a lot of the well-known people who access it have been males. And I always felt that was kind of weird that like women haven't been getting the attention they should, and in the essence of like, hey, it's equal here, like everyone should have access to this. So but Steiner says like a daily review at the end of the night. Like I think that's big. Like at the end of the day, while you're laying in bed, you just do like a Polaroid of from when you got into bed all the way when you rise, and you don't stay on a Polaroid for long. It's just kind of like, I got into bed, before this I had tea, before that I had dinner, before that I worked out, before that I was at work. And like you just go through your day, because like you said earlier, like it's about that refinement. And we do it in education. I think that's what happens with education. The box system is we only reflect when like we subconsciously reflect during traumatic experiences. Like something crazy happens and it like we reflect on it and it plays back and forth, and then you learn from that. But there's a lot of small things that happen throughout the day that you want to reflect on. Or sometimes it's something like, oh man, we had that conversation and I should have said A, B, and C, and it's like 3 days later. If you did the Polaroid, you would have had that insight hopefully that night. And so it's good, according to Steiner, is like every night, like just make it a habit of reflecting. And so it's that. There's a lot of kriyas, like yoga kriyas, like staring at the candle. So if you're into technology on your phone a lot, or like given the lockdown, a lot of people have turned to technology, which isn't bad. You got to do what you got to do, but staring at the screen can be bad for your eyes and your soul. So you stare at a flame for 5-10 minutes a night and don't blink, and you'll be surprised how much your eyes water the first week, and then they stop watering. And like, so it's just all these just little things that are like, hey, incorporate this before you do any crazy psychedelics, because that way you get the full benefit. It's like a championship game. If you're going to go play for the World Series or the NBA Finals or whatever, the Super Bowl, it's like you do a lot of groundwork. You do a lot of boring drills and foundational work, and you go to practice and you show up, and then you do strength and conditioning and you rest and you eat, and then you play the game. And hopefully the cards fall where they do. And so that's just kind of the same idea as the book is just like this very, do these 20 things for 2 weeks and then, pick one or two that resonated with you and keep them in your 3D life, keep journaling or keep being creative or, that type of vibe. So that's what it's about.
That's so cool. I can't wait to receive mine. And I bet, like, even just listening to you right now, I'm like, I bet that this would be an incredible sort of resource for anybody wanting to develop their psychic abilities, even without psychedelics. Like, all of those sounds so, yeah, it's like drills. It makes me think, my husband really loves mixed martial arts, and he used to fight when he was younger, and like, he's always kind of like fake practicing his drills and he's sort of like kind of been out of it for a while, but he's like, it's just I never know when I'm going to need them, and like I want to have that as like a like nervous system encoded muscle memory. It's kind of the same thing. It's like when you encounter some really cool experience, either through psychedelics or just spontaneous consciousness activations, it's like then being able to surf it and really like make the most of it, rather than kind of shutting down and wobbling off and having it take like a weird funky turn on you because you weren't necessarily prepared for it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I only did like the psychedelic part because I felt like, man, if I just write this without this, it sounds like one of those like guru self-help books, which are adamant in any online category. You can find a bunch of those. No, there's nothing wrong with those too, but I've read plenty of them, but I just kind of wanted more of a niche. Like I wanted that, like that angle. And I was just like, but yeah, definitely, even if you were brought up and you're in that box of like, well, psychedelics are drugs, like that's fine. Just use it as like a kind of a template of like, hey, if you want to be more in tune with your psychic self or your higher self, or in anything, or if you just want to grow, like here's another perspective of mine. It's like I don't have 40 years yet, but it's kind of like my juiciness I put into a quick 100-page book. Like, here's the juicy part of the fruit that I found, and you guys eat it up, take what you want. Like, it doesn't have to be your fruit. Like, it's just another juicy part that I'm giving out. So yeah, it's definitely can be helpful for anyone. So
that's amazing. And I can't wait to read it. And if anybody is interested in having a conversation with JT, Instagram handle is in the show notes. And I just loved talking to you so much. I'm really looking forward to talking to you again sometime, hopefully sooner than later. And everybody, I love you. I love you more than I can say. And I completely value your attention. That you chose to spend this time with JT and I means a lot to me. So thank you. I hope you have a beautiful day or night wherever you are. And I will catch you on the next episode, everyone. Hello, beautiful soul. Thank you so much for listening to Third Eye Awakening. If you love the show and you want to show me some support, as well as get some rich and awesome extra content, then you can support me through Rockfin or Patreon. It really goes a long way to help me create Third Eye Awakening and keep it free for everyone and ad-free, because isn't that nice? Isn't it so nice to listen to a podcast without any ads on it? I feel like it is. No shade to anybody who puts ads on their podcast, but I just love creating content and I love having ad-free content. So in order to do that, I've created a Rockfin account and a Patreon account with all kinds of juicy conversations and solo rants and riffs and sort of trainings on spiritual topics, metaphysical topics, just cool shit to anchor in some of that multidimensional light consciousness and expand your mind. Thank you always so much, whether you choose to support or not. It just means the world to me to have you listening to this podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me on this episode. I appreciate you more than my words could ever say. Please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and share, and I will catch you on the next episode.